Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to the fourth installment in our five-part series, Growing Up, a literary series about growing pains, curated by D.A. Navoti and presented in partnership with Open Books, a poem emporium. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and the Seattle Times for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I also wanted to give a shout out to our partners over at Open Books. They've been partnering with us on this entire series, and we just love them. They're one of what I think are just two poetry only bookstores in the United States, and we're so lucky to have them here in our city. So we encourage you to check them out, and we'll pop a link to their store in the chat. And then one other thing, after tonight's program, we're interested in hearing from you. So we'll post a link to a program survey in the chat as well. And we'd appreciate it if you took a minute after the event to fill that out. We'd love to hear what you think. Now I'm delighted to welcome D.A. Navoti, the curator for this new series, who will introduce tonight's program. D.A. is a member of the Gila River Indian community and a nonfiction and poetic prose writer. His work has appeared in Homology Lit, Spartan, Indian Country Today, Cloud Throat, and elsewhere. He produces the literary series We the Indigenous and co-created Fight for Our Lives, a reading series supporting communities targeted by divisive politics. He's a 2020 Radical Imagination Grant recipient from the NDN Collective and was a 2020 City Artist from the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Please welcome D.A. Navoti.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stesha, and welcome everyone to this special Father's Day edition of Growing Up, a reading series about growing pains. So kind of the thrill for me for this evening is, again, we're having a special Father's Day edition where we'll be honoring dads, stepdads, dad figures, uncles, caregivers, and more. So happy early Father's Day to all the dads and dad figures out there. But this five-part series began last April, and I was able to understand what it means to be a young person in 2021. So we collaborated with Seattle Arts and Lectures Youth Poet Laureate Program and Youth Speak Seattle, which we were just floored by just this amazing talent from the Seattle area. So please definitely support the Youth Poet Laureate Program at Seattle Arts and Lecture, and then also Youth Speak Seattle. But from there, I was also delighted to hear from writers as we honored moms, stepmoms, chosen moms, and caregivers for a special Mother's Day event. And so tonight, our theme continues this focus on the so-called third act of adult life, which I call adulthood. And in particular, I wanted to focus on fatherhood this evening. So what is there to say about fatherhood? Well, there's a lot, actually. And so I got a couple of quotes. One from William Shakespeare, who says, "It is a wise father that knows his own child." And then George Herbert in 1640 said, "One father is more than 100 schoolmasters." Kent Nerburn has a kind of humorous way of kind of defining fatherhood. And he says, "It is much easier to become a father than to be one." And then lastly, Reed Markham says, "Being a great father is like shaving. No matter how good you shave today, you have to do it again tomorrow." So with us tonight are four brilliant writers and caring writers who will walk us through adulthood and fatherhood from their point of view, from the simple to the complicated moments, from the easy to the difficult, and from the celebrated life choices to long-held regrets. So everyone cozy up, grab some snacks and some beverages, maybe an adult beverage since we're focusing on adulthood today and fatherhood, but let's dive in. So I'm really excited to welcome our first reader this evening, and that will be poet and fiction writer Aaron Counts, who is committed to the work of opening art spaces to marginalized voices. Locally, he co-founded Youth Speak Seattle, the Seattle Youth Poet Laureate Program, and Creative Justice, where he served as lead artist and executive director for its first 6 years. He is the author of the poetry collection Strange Tongue Names and co-authored the empowerment curriculum Reclaiming Black Manhood. His poetry and prose have appeared in print and online, including LitHub, Spectre Magazine, Best Cherry, Aldebaran Review, Rufus City Review, and the audio literary series The Furnace and In the Distance. His first publication, however, was on his mother's old Kenmore refrigerator on 7th Avenue in Yakima, Washington. He earned his MFA from the University of British Columbia. Everyone, please welcome Aaron Counts.
Super excited to be here. Thanks to DA and the library for having me. Yeah, I have stepped away from my life as an artist for a little while. So this is my first reading in a long time. I really am proud to have rededicated myself to the creative process. And as much as I loved doing the work at Creative Justice, just being able to focus on the stories and that I need to write has been really a great couple of months. So I'm excited. First reading in a long time. So you know, if there's nervousness, I guess that's what it's about, but it's mostly excitement. Thank you. The Swampy Cree people of what is now known as Northern Ontario and Manitoba have a saying: to say the name is to begin the story. The power to name something is to shape its history. What is someone or something called? And do we call that mountain that most of us saw today to the south, do we call it Tahoma or Rainier? And what does that mean? Was a person a slave or were they enslaved? And what does that mean, to call it those things? So I'm going to open with a poem called My Name in honor of that, as someone who's descended from both those people whose names were taken and those that took them. This poem's called My Name after John Winchesky. My name was coughed from the mouth of a volcano and floated in a cloud of ash toward the sea. It became netted in the sails of a three-masted schooner and was pulled by rough hands into the ship's dark hold. Shackled in that darkness, my name twisted in the puddles of sweat and shit of the strange tongue names held next to it. It called those names cousin. From time to time, it was forced onto the ship's deck where it cringed at the glare of an unfamiliar sun. Eventually, the ship lurched into port and my name stumbled into the purse of a don't call me Englishman. He tightened his grip and laughed with a tobacco-stained sneer, while my name jingled in his clutch like coins. It emerged wordless in this man's home and found solace in the smile of his daughter, who treated my name like a pet, feeding it milk-soaked bread and morsels of bacon. With a soft voice, she read my name books in the shade of a black gum tree. In their secrets, she became my name too. And that's how I was born, making music in the emptiness with my name laughing in the face of the wind. Let's see, growing up, sometimes we're all born into a family and then even if you have an amazing family, you choose a larger, bigger family. And for me, that was hip hop. In a lot of ways, hip hop is as responsible as anything for who I became as an adult. So this is a hip hop poem called Sleight of Hand. It's for Jay. Jay could sever the jugular of any record you dare dig up, juggling beats with the secondhand sweep of his Seiko, and he never missed his mark. We learned our swagger when he spun, bebopping into clubs with just a few bucks and even fewer IDs, pounding fists rather than shaking hands because DJs licked fingertips for better grip while scratching, and man could Jay scratch. He was a magician. His mixes hypnotized us. Head still bow in respect to his ability to bedevil crowds by playing the Beasties' Paul Revere beat backwards, holding the inverted needle to the underside of the record as it spun counterclockwise, held aloft by a spool of thread. That was long before he started to spin out of control. He's unraveling now, standing crooked-spined on street corners, zombie-eyed, espousing astral realities to no one in particular, while matted locks hurtle down his back toward the concrete he calls home. There's so much I want to say to him, but my tongue is dumbstruck. and I only manage small talk and a hug. When my hand slides the $5 bill into his, I wonder what magic licks his fingertips now. I live in the Central District, which I have since '98, and it's the only neighborhood my kids have ever known. So we are just always remarking about how fast things are changing and what's changed over their lifetime. So I have a few super short poems in love with the Central District. Maybe we'll revisit them in about 10 years and see what still applies. This is Central District Love Story #1. When gunshots bust out the window at Starbucks, boy unbuckles baby sister from her car seat, holds her chubby fingers in his fist, and hums a lullaby, while the two do their best to melt into the floorboard of the car. Central District Love Story #2. All our places are gone now. Your grandma's porch, where you asked me if I liked you. The park where we shared our first clumsy kiss is still a park, but now it's gone to the dogs. Good thing so many people are running around here now, because I definitely need to jog my memory. Maybe we'll read one more Central District Love Story. Central District Love Story. We lost you, Black child, about the same time you learned to steal your face instead of cry when another one passed. Black child, you a lost we, a loss we squint not to see here, a whispered secret they can't hear, too worried about whatever threat your body be. The way you slice through the streets like a sharp blade, fuck you all up in your headphones. Delicate menace, they see stone fist and cold glare, burning flare, a warning sign that reads, there are no children here. Rabid dog, beware. They're gonna bury you deep under the rubble you're chained to. Erect a shiny city to mark your grave. One of my favorite memories of my father is they involve boxing, most of them. And this is before the days of pay-per-view, when Wide World of Sports on Saturday mornings had all the good fights. And of course, Ali was king. I'm always first Black superhero in far as the Counts family is concerned. So I have a poem here, The Passion of Ali, which is after the photograph for the Esquire cover, 1968 cover of Esquire magazine, as it depicts Muhammad Ali as Saint Sebastian. If you don't know the photo, maybe take a look. It's one of my favorite sports photos of all time. The Passion of Ali. Champ dips his head to the right and slips the shots launched from the firing squad. They're bare-knuckled brawlers, these guards, no holds barred. Keep your hands hidden, he tells himself in strained whispers. These are bad men, and they got a quarrel with you, son. Exasperation parts Muhammad's mouth, but still he stands, bronze body bleeding where arrows have pierced the skin surrounding his heart. He won't barter beliefs with these archers. He'd rather be martyred here in the Emperor's court. Ali knows for too long we preferred our patron saints in the form of rosy-faced cherubs, halos aglow as they flit into conversations, mumbling meaningless words like perhaps and maybe and someday. But he punctuated demands with rhyming couplets that rocked our collective ribcage, thunderous hooks that rattled claustrophobic bones with echoes of bravery and bravado that stood up in the face of ugliness. Ali stood up, said to us all, I'm so pretty. And we stood with him, dangerously beautiful too. How's time? You got good time? Okay, let me do another poem and then I'll do a story excerpt. This poem was the hardest maybe poem I've ever written, maybe because it's directly about my father instead of ambiently about my father. It's called Crash. Many nights as a boy, I woke to the sound of crashing. My father, an insomniac, found solace in our unfinished basement, a secondhand couch and red felted pool table. He quieted his mind by shooting 9-ball, something calming in the precise geometry required to rattle a ball into a pocket with a soft thud. Lying in my bedroom above, I could almost see the pool balls spin across the felt and careen into each other under the controlled force of my father's hands. His brother lived in that basement some months between jobs or wives. He slept on the worn couch, coming upstairs to the fridge when he needed to fetch beer or food. His laugh rasped from too many cigarettes when he cracked jokes during the day, but at night, drunk, the laugh often turned mean. One night, his girlfriend stood up to the bullying and their fight spilled upstairs. This time, instead of fetching beer from the kitchen, my uncle came after a knife. My father lay awake in his room, listening. I squinted into the blinding bright of the kitchen and watched my father move his body between the blade and a woman he barely knew. He gripped the thick shoulders of his only brother and shoved hard, flinging the large man into the pantry. The collision shook soup cans loose and they rattled to the floor and spun towards my uncle, heaped on linoleum. Wordless, my father walked over and stood above his brother, paused and pulled him to his feet. The fight was over and they never spoke of it again. On my own sleepless nights, I miss my father most. Insomniac is a lonely profession, so I haunt the shadows of quiet rooms looking for some life with which to commune. I sometimes end up in my son's bedroom, sitting on the rug next to his bed. I wrap my fist around his and watch his chest fill with breath. The crickets he keeps to feed his gecko chirp. The cage clicks as one leaps a failed escape through the plastic wall. I hold my son's hand in quiet and hope I too can pass on what most of us only learn the hard way, who to pull close and who to push away. All right, are we good on time? I have a few pages of a story I would love to share. It's sort of unfinished. I've been revisiting it this week.
Oh, we're good on time, so yeah, go for it.
Great. This, let me see, well, sometimes the biggest influence we have as parents is in the holes that we leave, either by being unprepared or overwhelmed or neglect, or sometimes just bad luck. And this story is sort of pokes around at that. How does that happen and what does it mean? It's about a teenage girl, Brooklyn, who lives with her drug addicted mother as they try to maintain a family shoplifting ring. This is the morning after one of their capers, and mom's trying to set her daughter up with one of her own grown friends. The story is called Nothing But a Number. The next morning, Brooklyn woke to the sound of Jackson crying. She'd fallen asleep holding him on the couch with her, but sometime in the middle of the night, she had wrapped him in a blanket and set him on the floor just below her. Now he kicked his way free of the blanket and looked around to figure out where he was. She bolted upright at his first sounds, not quite ready to be awake, but she didn't want him toddling into their mom's room too early for fear he might wander in on something inappropriate or worse. Brooklyn pulled him up on the couch and turned on the TV, hoping he would stay entertained just 15 minutes longer while she dozed a bit. When he couldn't keep still, she took him into the kitchen to eat dry Cheerios from the tray of his high chair. Sometime later, her mother and Jacob emerged from the bedroom. "How'd it go with Lester last night?" she sang. "I hear you made quite an impression." "What are you talking about, Mom?" "Well, he told Jacob he took quite a liking to you. I already called this morning asking about you." Brooklyn couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Oh my God, Mom," she said. "He's older than you." "He is not," Teresa said. "Lester's not even 35. As if that was much better. Besides, girl, her mother went on, age ain't nothing but a number. Look at me and Jacob. She swatted his ass. He smiled and shrugged in Brooklyn's direction. And anyway, it's not like Lester's gonna get a grown-ass woman to go out with him. He's too damn dumb. Brooklyn sighed and rolled her eyes. Unbelievable, she said. What are those high school boys gonna do for you besides knock you up and leave you broke? At least Lester has a job. He can take care of you. Yeah, Mom, Brooklyn shot back, and maybe he can take me to prom too. Forget prom, Teresa said. That don't matter. You're sitting on a gold mine there. She pointed between her daughter's legs. Brooklyn scooped Jackson from his high chair and hugged him onto her lap. Gross. Shut up. Just think about it. Hold your son, Brooklyn said, handing the baby to her mom. I have to do laundry today. Brooklyn walked into the bedroom and pulled the half-full laundry basket from the closet. It was full of her clothes only. Her mother's were heaped on the floor in one corner of the room. She set the basket down and went to fetch her mom's pile. She first started to scoop everything up in one wide armload, but realized she maybe should be careful of needles in the pockets. Instead, she picked up each item one by one, patting them down for foreign objects just to be safe. She didn't find much, some crumpled gum wrappers and the case of a ballpoint pen. In the pocket of one pair of jeans, Brooklyn found a yellow Bic lighter. Its metal cap was a bit off kilter and loose. She held the lighter and flicked the flint wheel with her thumb and jumped a little as the flame shot up about 6 inches or so, much higher than she expected. Brooklyn could feel the heat in her eyes as the Bic hissed its giant flame, coming close to singeing her lashes. She tossed it into the trash bin and scooped up the rest of the clothes in her arms. When Mom was binging, her dirty laundry smelled different. Not just the usual sweat and smoke then, but something metallic. It reminded Brooklyn of the summer after 5th grade when she discovered the taste of coins. That was the year she became responsible for taking care of herself and Nico while their mom partied or slept. It wasn't as hard as Brooklyn would have expected it to be. She got pretty good at fishing crumpled single dollars from her mom's jeans while she slept, or digging between the couch cushions for lost change so she could be sure there was milk and cereal and peanut butter in the house for them to eat. The trick was keeping her mom from realizing there was still cash around the house. So Brooklyn stuffed bills into her shoe and held coins in her mouth so they didn't jingle in her pockets before she could place the money in an empty Crown Royal whiskey bag and stuff the purple sack in the back of her closet. She discovered the coins in the mouth trick quite by accident earlier that summer. The neighborhood kids had run out to greet the ice cream truck, waving dollar bills they'd gotten from their parents from the ends of their lanky arms. She and Nico stayed in their yard and watched it pass. The next door neighbor called out to her. Mr. Wayne was a science teacher at the high school, and he spent summers sitting on his front porch. Brooklyn often felt a little creeped out by his watching, but he usually talked nice. Here, sweetie, he said, run over there with the rest of those kids and get yourself and your brother something sweet. He held some money from his fingertips and shook his hand in Brooklyn's direction. That first time, it was just a couple single bills, but by August, it wasn't a surprise for him to hand over a 5 or 2, once a 20. You keep that somewhere safe, he said, when Brooklyn tried to give him the change. It was just 40 cents that time, few coins. You might need it. He rubbed a slow circle between her shoulder blades, then trailed his hand down her lower back and let it rest there, looming. You don't need to tell your mom about that money. It's just for you. Brooklyn looked into his face, and your brother, of course, he winked. She thanked him and turned back to her own yard, where Nico was licking a drip of fudgesicle from his knuckles. She clutched the money in her fist while she finished her ice cream bar, and then, not having any pockets in the shorts she was wearing, she stuffed the change into her mouth for safekeeping. The coins felt comfortable in there, and she ran her tongue along their edges and smooth faces, but they tasted foul and made her mouth salivate quite a lot. She saved $37 that summer. Brooklyn didn't feel sick anymore when she thought about Mr. Wayne's hands, but that metal taste never left her. Even today, the copper smell of her mother's clothes took her right back to that summer, and the spit pooled under Brooklyn's tongue enough that it threatened to drip out of her lips. She spit into the armload of clothes as she walked them into the other room and jammed them into the washing machine. Then she picked up her phone and called Lester. All right, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you again. letting me share.
Splendid.
And
Everyone,
there's DA.
everyone, please give a round of applause for Aaron Counts. And actually, before we move on to our next reader, Aaron, I was really kind of just reflect. You stopped me. Your poetry stopped me, and I noticed something. And especially with like your Central District love stories, The Passion of Ali, and then the poem about your father, Crash. And what I'm noticing is that your work, it's very people driven and also community driven. And I compare that to kind of just who you are. You're a nonprofit leader, you're a community advocate, and an artist. So I'm gonna call you a triple threat. And so I want to know, really, being a triple threat for the years that you've been doing this type of work, I'm wondering, what have you learned about yourself?
Wow, such a great question. The interesting thing is, I thank you for saying that. I got my start as a writer from doing the community work. So I think that's maybe where that comes from. I used to work at a high school reentry program in West Seattle, Southwest Youth and Family Services, and in the summers we would throw out the curriculum and use personal essay and poetry as the language arts curriculum, and then publish that in a chapbook. And I would just say, keep to the students, people are going to tell your stories, so you might as well be the ones to tell them. And I write along with them and you can only say, you can only urge a young person to be bold and to share themselves and what they know so many times before you have to sort of put up or shut up too. And so I wrote along with them, and here it is, I don't know, many years later, and the program is still running there, and I'm still trying to tell community stories here. So
I love that, and I'm glad that program's continuing along with the other work that you have done, and just want to say thank you so much for just being very community and mission driven. It's work that needs to be done, and I'm just glad that you have been able to share your leadership and create these programs for just the community. So again, thank you so much. And again, everyone, let's give another round of applause to Aaron Counts. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, we're off to a great start, and we're going to continue this. So my next reader, Alex Gallo Brown, is a poet and labor organizer in Seattle. He is the author of Variations of Labor, which is from Chin Music Press, 2019, which is a collection of poems and stories. And Alex Gallo Brown's going to be father to baby number 2 any moment. It could be tonight, it could be tomorrow, it could be this weekend. So everyone, please welcome Alex Gallo Brown.
Thank you so much. As you can see, it's a family affair here. It's really an honor to be reading with all of you. Thank you, Aaron. That was amazing work. And Father's Day is always kind of loaded for me. I lost my father, I guess, about 13, 14 years ago now, quite suddenly. And then, I became a father a little over 3 years ago. And then, of course, we're going to have another one any day now. So I'm going to read mostly poems that I wrote over the past year, as I was sort of in lockdown in my house, which, coincided with Aura being, I think she was about 2 when all that started. And now she's a little over 3. And so I wrote a lot of poems sort of about her and to her and for her. And I'm not the most visual person. I think these are almost like operate as snapshots for me a little bit. So anyway, this poem's called Another House. In the house, there was another, and then another, one made from the box used to deliver her grandmother's microwave, another that shipped her father's poetry books, a third that only she could see. There was a little bed where the little seal and little cat took long restorative naps, and teacups that never failed to fulfill their promise. Can you see the world where she lived once, where she lives now? My phone skulks in front of me like an exhausted cloud. So that was my house poem. This one is wrote last summer when all that stuff was happening, and I was primarily at home with my family, and I got out to a few of the protests, but I was not able to make many of them, and this is sort of about that. Summertime. Yellow pears peek out again, trees offering their little buds, but all I see is conflagration reflected by their green leaves. A girl of only a few lived years, pepper sprayed, teenagers wrenched from their friends and swarmed with gas, bicycles driven into protesters' heads, rubber reshaping bones. My daughter learned the word summertime. She says, "I will see you tomorrow, Dad," before sprinting off to sleep.
What?
In the mornings, I pick blackberries, sometimes with her in my arms. We stew the blackberries with lemon and sugar, layer compote onto ice cream. My wife feeds her green beans from our garden. We swaddle the windows with towels so the sun won't disturb her sleep. At night, I stare out at pears glowing yellow against dark leaves. I try to shut out images that sting, one of them our daughter, clad in combat fatigues. This is before sleep. At night before sleep, she says, "I like Mama and Dada, but the problem is I don't like Dada's beard." In the morning, she backtracks. "I do like Dada's beard. No problem. Everything just right in this place that's big enough for 3, so why shouldn't we make one more? How much property needs to be private? How much privacy is too much property? I've lived here for 2,000 years. My people wandered a desert once. Look at me, gasping among all this air." This poem is about salami. Half of my family is Italian American, or very much like salami. And my uncle likes salami a lot. He passed away a couple of years ago. And I used to eat a lot of salami with my uncle. So anyway, that's kind of what this is about. And also raising her, of course. Sopressata. Couple slices of salami smashed between a folded piece of supermarket whole wheat was a sandwich my uncle taught me when I was too young to think about a thing like balance or ethics or the recipe for a cure. I agreed it was good when fresh out the fridge, bread warm from the counter, a smear of mustard if you had the time. My uncle didn't, not then and not now. He handed his out first in small clumps, then it ran away from him all at once. I didn't know about that either then, but he must have on the porch holding a yellow bag atop, shreds of stories between his teeth and his belly full of the cured Italian meat my parents paid for. Nothing fancy, you understand. I'm talking boar's head, 1/3 of a pound in a plastic bag with a barcode stuck on to seal it. Nothing like this imported stuff I sliced for my daughter, layer on a platter alongside pitted calamatas and marinating beans. I wonder if my uncle ate enough to kill him. Got a couple more here. This one is called The Inner Life of American Communism, which I took from the title of a book review that I read over the summer about a couple of kind of left-wing books. I really like that title, and sort of this is the poem that came from it. A carnage of flowers and ferns and other formerly living things. Perhaps murder too strong a word, but this is something of how I feel as I heft the machine my daughter calls Loud Lion and guide it along the line of property a document claims is mine, ours. I could be talking about a marriage, but I'm not. Not here on the porch where the neighbors might hear our arguments. Nighttime gathers like a parent collecting toys after a long day of work. I know my neighbors take their lawn care seriously, watch their shoulders press against machines much louder and more lion-like than mine. When they stride through the aisles of hardware stores, I imagine their gaits purposeful yet serene, while my own visits bring me only those familiar glimmers of grief. Gas can, trimmer replacement, tiny jug of 2-cycle oil. My neighbors are not communists, not that I can tell from the porch, reading my left-wing magazine. I've never entered my neighbors' homes. They've never visited mine. But I'll tell you, last winter, when my Corolla stalled in the snow, one of them bounded out with a board and tried to pry it loose. And yesterday, when my Lion fell asleep, another ran inside to find a gas can and refill it. So that's one is called, or sorry, I have 2 more. One is called, this one is called Push Me. My daughter says, push me, but I don't know what she means, what she needs. So I take her at her word, plop her body into a push cart, plod behind her as we prowl downhill. No sidewalks in our neighborhood, but a stop sign the city installed last year. The talk of our street for a day or week or 4. Fruit trees whisper the news from our backyards. Fireworks broadcast the announcement nearly every night. At the bottom of the hill, we stop to look both ways. On one side, 3 Asian men are playing cards in a garage. Across the street, a black teen helps a young child climb a plastic slide. When I first saw you, a woman told me recently I thought you were Mexican. After I heard you talk, I knew that you were white. Something in my voice giving me away, a poison secreted unwittingly between my cheeks. I bend my knees to usher my daughter uphill. We're headed for the Big Mouth, our code name for the excavators transforming the hillside into townhomes for the extraordinarily employed. By now, most of the houses have been built. Soon the mouse will be deployed to other neighborhoods to construct more residences the residents cannot afford. My daughter needs so much. Years have passed and still she weighs less than a bag of compost I bought so her mother could grow us food. Certainly less than the fruit tree we had cut down so its neighbors could more easily endure. My knees sag, so I shove harder, faster to get her where she wants to go. What type of strength, I wonder, will it take to watch my own heart try to make sense of this world on her own? This is the last poem I'll read. This is actually probably the earliest one of all these. I wrote quite a while ago, but it felt like a good one to end on. It's called The Normal Ways. In the morning, her mom is gone, and it's just me, watching her tip an empty espresso cup to her lips or fuss with a bottle of the spiciest hot sauce on Beacon Hill. There's nowhere I'd rather be than here with my daughter spitting sour blackberries into plastic Tupperware or piling miniature granola and yogurts onto tiny rubber spoons. I feel my younger self looking, judging, leering with disappointment. This is no way to live, I might have said, did to older men who I assessed as insufficiently alive. What did I know then? I was exhausted by a kind of pain I find it hard to imagine now when I brush my thumb against her upper lip or turn her body upside down until her mouth makes a song I can't imagine living without. I was never content with the normal ways. This will be what I will tell you when you are older if I don't forget, which I might, since my mind is not a thing that you should rely on or attempt to predict. But my love, that is constant, that will always be for you. Thank you all.
Everyone, please give a round of applause for Alex Gallo Brown. 2 things, Alex, and 1 question. The first thing is salami poem. I think every poet needs to have a salami poem, so let's normalize that. The second thing is I just love the toddler whispers in the background. It just added to the effect, so we should have more toddler whispers in poetry readings moving forward. It just kind of amplified all of your work. And the cool thing about your work that I've noticed is that it felt very like snapshots in moments in time. Whether they're in the garden or hanging out with your kid, again, you're just like very specific. Here's a snapshot and let me explain or tell you what's happening. So I'm wondering that, what's a recent moment for you that you would just like it to stick around just a little bit longer? A recent moment.
That's a great question. I think right now it's an interesting moment because we're expecting to have a child any day, and so I think things are kind of heightened right now for us. We're sort of like the last days of kind of the 3 of us, but yeah, nothing's coming to mind exactly. I feel like those moments are what make it into the poems basically, and like my mind, like I said, not so great at retaining things, so I have to put them into writing. But this is a good moment right now having this go. So.
Oh, I love it. Everyone, let's again give another round of applause to Alex Gallo Brown, and also extend an early congratulations for you and to the family and for the next kiddo coming out again any moment. So thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. All right. My heart is full right now. I'm feeling the love, warm and fuzzy feelings inside. So yeah, let's continue building off of that. Our third reader this evening is Ross McMeekin, whose debut novel, The Hummingbirds, was published in 2018 by Skyhorse. His short fiction has appeared recently or is forthcoming in publications such as Virginia Quarterly Review, Lost Balloon, Shenandoah, Redivider, Tin House's Open Bar, and Maudlin House. His nonfiction has appeared in Numero 5 and The Rumpus. He's received fellowships from Hugo House and the Jack Straw Cultural Center in Seattle. He edits the literary journal Spartan and holds an MFA in fiction from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Everyone, please welcome Ross McMeekin.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Dan, for inviting me, and thanks so much to the readers to read alongside with. This is just a great honor. It's really special for me because I've got a very energetic 9-year-old and 5-year-old that may come in here at any time, which would be fantastic. I love that sort of feel. I love that Alex had his band going in there. That's great. So I thought I'd read a couple short stories, kind of do the Leonard Cohen thing, like the minor fall and the major lift. And this first story is a little bit darker. It's about the cycles of violence among fathers and sons and families, but also the broken love that still exists between them and the relationship between the environment. The story is called Below the Falls, and it was published in the literary journal Shenandoah. So I'll just start right in. Through his good eye, the boy could just make out the passing trees, boulders, and bushes in the faint light of the moon, which was veiled by a river of mist coasting a dozen yards overhead. A gust of morning wind through the river valley brazed the bare skin of the boy's hands. He pulled them into sleeves of his parka and crouched low against the bow of the drift boat. His father sat above in the crossbar seat, crowned by a headlamp, correcting their drift with his large wooden oars. The father's headlamp shot a spotlight here and there along the river and the bank and occasionally on the boy. The father liked that the air smelled of damp earth and vegetation. He also liked to hear the uninterrupted sound of the wind, waking birds, weed stalks rubbing together in the shallows, and the occasional gurgles and slurps of the slow-moving water. These smells and sounds reminded him that he existed. Sometimes during his long days working on the assembly line, as he rehashed the same blunt action over and over, it felt as if he did not. The boy lived with his mother in an apartment in the city. His mother worked at a shipping warehouse most days and as a waitress at a chain diner 2 nights a week. The boy took the Metro bus to parochial school and back during the school year. He was responsible for the washing of the clothes and dishes and the preparation of dinner during the evenings his mother worked. The boy spent 1 weekend a month with his father, who lived 2 hours north. His mother occasionally told the boy that, despite her wishes, he had to visit his father. Every month upon his return, she urged the boy to tell him everything that happened, even if there didn't seem to be anything worth telling. The boy was very small for his age, and the way in which he crouched deep into the bow of the drift boat diminished his stature even more. The man tried his best not to blame the boy and his mother for his size, but it was difficult because the man believed that had he been allowed to stick around, the boy would have turned out more substantial. The boat shifted and rocked as the boy and the father switched places. The boy felt the warmth left by his father on the seat. He palmed the oars and felt the warmth there too. Whenever the boy thought of his father, the first image that came into his mind was the domed curvature of his eyes and the hawkish way they protruded from their sockets. Even in pictures, his look could startle. There on the river, the boy couldn't see his father's eyes. Only the cool glow of the headlamp lent his father's breath, which twisted and spun in front of his lips before dissolving. But those eyes never left the boy's imagination. The figments remained fixed in his father's face, even in the dark. The father pulled a leather case from beneath the storage shelf below the gunwale of the port side of the drift boat. He unzipped the case and slid out a rifle. The beam of the headlamp searched up and down the length of it, illuminating small circles of its structure with light. Though the boy had never seen a rifle in person, and he suspected his mother would not approve, the rifle itself was not an object that most captured his attention. It was the brass shells. In the light of his father's headlamp, they shined like so many pieces of gold. Such beauty encased what rifles hurled through the air, glossy gems that held the stuff that plugged holes into skin and hide. The boy's father had many memories of his own deceased father, but the beating stood out. His father, when drunk, struck him and his sisters with his hands and his knees, and his cane and belt and shoes. He tried to make sense of the old man, but couldn't, even though he ended up working in the same factory, drinking the same beer, sipping the same bourbon from the same flask at his lunch break. Understanding remained out of reach, even though, like his father, he married a woman who wanted to save him from himself and had children he hoped would change him in the ways he felt he should change. One fine morning in the September of his childhood, the boy's father and his own father went out fishing before dawn. There the father learned how to best catch salmon. One came upon them unawares in the dark, using the headlamp as a guide, and fired a shot just above the fish's snout. The rifle shot would serve as a concussion blast, and the salmon would float stunned to the surface. That it was illegal to do this, that they agreed no one else should know, that they made up a plausible story should they be questioned about poaching. All of this only made the time between the boy's father and his own father feel more special. The jet stream of mist above the river had now sunk to eye level, and the boy, through his good eye, watched its shimmering beads glisten in the light of the father's headlamp. He felt the moisture dampen his lips, but not his cheeks, which were chilled numb. In the haze and lumen of the headlamp, his father's outline stood, butt of the rifle against one shoulder, hand fanned over the trigger, other hand stretched out, palm up, steadying the barrel. The spotlight of the father's lamp followed slow, searching arcs across the surface of the river. Where it landed, the water turned shallow green, like that of half-brewed tea. His father fired. The salmon floated toward the boat, white belly breaching the surface just as the rifle report ceased echoing along the canyon. The father reached out and sunk the net into the water and then hoisted it up, pausing for a moment before settling it down in the hole so the boy could see the shuddering arc of the salmon bulge in the bottom of the fluorescent green netting. "Chinook," said the father to the boy. "See the mouth? That's how you can tell it's a hen." This was verbatim what his own father had said to him years earlier. The boy nodded. In the light of the headlamp, the father noticed the opaque film covering the boy's fake eye. The boy had lost the eye years before when the father struck him with the palm of his hand. The father had struck him with the palm of his hand because the boy had been using some of his father's prized baseball cards for spokes flaps on his bicycle. Since the event, the father often reminded himself that it was an accident and that it occurred while delivering a punishment that was justified, a punishment meant to teach the boy a lesson every child needed to learn. The father reminded himself of this often because the image of the boy's eye appeared often in his mind, and the shortness of breath accompanying the image wouldn't go away without a struggle. The chrome, green, and blue salmon dazzled in the light of the headlamp, but gave off a harsh smell, somewhere between asparagus and gasoline. The boy reached out and touched its silvery skin near the tail. It felt smooth, a little slimy. Little lumps lined the white scaling near the posterior fin, resembling little pearls. The boy's father coughed into his fist a few times, then caught his breath. Finally, he said, "Sea lice. This hen is fresh from the salt. Maybe even came up yesterday." He then wiped the bugs from the salmon with his finger and flicked them into the water. When a moth became trapped inside their apartment in the city, the boy's mother would capture it between her cupped palms and release it out the window. The boy's father pulled a sheath from the front pocket of his jeans and slid out a bone-handled knife. With the blade, he pierced a hole through the fish's skull. There was something unnatural the boy felt about what had just happened. It wasn't a sound he had heard before. The boy wished he hadn't. He felt certain he would hear it now in his dreams. The boy watched the fish, gills bleeding, the salmon open its mouth. The boy felt something stretching inside of his own skin. The officer wore large aviator glasses that reflected the pullout adjacent to the river in a distorted way. Wedged beneath his armpit was a notepad. In his fingers spun a pencil. He strolled around the boat, peering inside. He set his notebook on the ground and leaned deep for a closer look. His feet nearly left the ground. The officer exhaled audibly and returned to his feet. He picked up his notebook and flipped a few pages. He took off his glasses and slid them between the two buttons of his tan-collared shirt. "Let's start with your licenses," he said. The boy had been taught by his mother not to lie. The boy had been taught by his father not to lie. The boy had been taught in school not to lie. This had left the boy unprepared to lie. He was willing, but without practice. A gust of canyon wind rattled the fine papers in the father's hand. He stretched them flat against his knees and finished reading there on the picnic bench near the boat landing. When he finished, he folded them up and slid them into his breast pocket, where they stuck up nearly to his collar. The tires of the officer's tan pickup truck spun gravel as they carried the rest of the parking lot. The father and the boy sat next to each other in the cab as they drove along the empty highway, towing the drift boat behind them. Neither of them said a word. The boy felt as though his lungs didn't work, that they wouldn't fill up. He tried his best not to reveal this. His father's chapped lips wrapped snug around a cigarette while his teeth worked out something behind it. A vein popped up and disappeared from the side of his forehead in rhythm with his grinding. His pronounced eyes strained from their sockets. He settled his foot onto the brakes and palmed the gear shift down a few notches and slowed onto the shoulder of the highway until they were stopped. The boy picked up his fake eye from the footwell of the truck and licked his fingers and began to rub the eyeball clean with his palm. It felt warm to his touch. His father said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." The boy interrupted him and said, "It's okay." The boy said this because it did feel okay, now that the ridge along his eyebrow throbbed, now that the inside was itchy, and now that the side of his face felt hot. The world somehow felt righted. He didn't understand why, but there was now more room in his lungs to breathe. The father reached over and hugged the boy. The boy leaned in, and the salmon lay still in the back. Okay, it's intense to read. That's the first one. Now that's the minor fall, the major lift. This is called Mentholatum, and it's about growing into fatherhood, or impending fatherhood, you could say, and the process that goes in a character's mind when his girlfriend is first expecting. The morning after Steve Lando discovered he was going to be a father, he and Teddy Nguyen drove up Highway 2 through Gold Bar and Index up to Stevens Pass to go snowboarding. The weather was dry until they hit Skykomish, when sleet started to fall, which slowly turned into a thick, wet snow as they made their way further up the mountain. Teddy rolled down his window to flick ash from a cigarette. The truck tires spun for a quick moment on the snow before catching. They were halfway through listening to Van Halen's Running Through the Devil when Teddy turned down the music and screamed. Teddy could do a good David Lee Roth animal howl, though there were very few people who could appreciate it. Teddy turned down the music. "Lando, you're bumming me out. I can feel their vibes. They're gross." He changed lanes to pass a Suburban that was going 20 through the packed snow. "Just relax," said Steve. He turned the music back up. He worried about what a person should listen to around a child, and at what volume. He didn't know what one did with a child. He'd never even held one. "Get it together," yelled Teddy over the music. "Today we ride, park and pow." He slapped the wheel with his palm. Steve hadn't mentioned the pregnancy to Teddy or anyone else. When his girlfriend Monique had given him the news, they'd stayed up late talking. The only way he could describe the conversation was that it felt like a phone interview, with all the silent pauses, the awkwardness. It was tough to put into words feelings you didn't recognize. He'd managed it by being polite and asking questions and letting Mona do most of the talking, which she'd seemed grateful to do, or at least willing. After he left her apartment, all he could think to do was to lift weights, so he went to 24-hour fitness and worked out until he could barely move. At the mountain, they parked along the side of the road a quarter-mile away and trudged slowly up the slopes in their boots, snow piled high and dirty beside the road. They planned to meet up with their friend Barney, who taught lessons in the morning and worked in the afternoon shift at the Jupiter Express chairlift, which ran up nearly 1,500 vertical feet in 4 minutes. After spending most of the morning in the back country on the far side of the mountain, they found Barney at the chairlift and got in line. The lift attendant wore a beard tied into braids and was eating popcorn from a bag. Steve could smell the butter, which reminded him of movie nights when he was a child. He wondered how old a child had to be to watch movies. It was their turn to get on the lift. The three of them hustled up to the red line and waited for the chair to swoop around and pick them up. A single got in next to them to fill out the fourth seat. It was a boy in skis and parka that had a patch of the Nordic Cross on the breast. Steve wondered how old he was, but he didn't ask, because when he was a kid, he'd always wished he was older, and admitting his actual age was always a letdown. They all sat down and the chair rushed them up the mountain, lifting them through the tree line. Out past the lifts was a steep face covered in scattered lumps and depressions of a mogul run. To the sides were evergreen trees laced with snow. Steve watched two skiers traverse the cat trails snaking between the trees. How long, he wondered, before you could teach a kid to snowboard? "The air up here is like a drug," said Teddy. "I took Sudafed last night," said the boy. "I had a cold, but now it's gone." "Well, here's something for you," said Teddy. "Hockey players used to take handfuls of Sudafed before games to give them energy. That's because the same drugs that are in Sudafed are also in meth. Do you know what meth is? Let's not talk about meth, said Steve. They keep the meth Sudafed behind the counter now, said Barney, pulling out one of his gloves. They have to see your ID if you want to buy it, and they'll only sell you that one package. I play hockey, said the boy. I almost forgot, said Teddy. He took off his glove and dug around in his pocket. He handed what looked to be tightly wrapped candies to each of them, including the boy. Mentholatum cough drops, he said. The boy looked nervous. They're fine, said Teddy. They're only cough drops. Suck on them for a few seconds and open your mouth to the cold. It'll feel like ice fairies are dancing inside. Steve removed his gloves and slid them into the pockets and unwrapped the lozenge. It was marbled white, slightly translucent, like the ice covering the lake of the winter cabin he'd visit once a year with his family, the lake he'd learned to skate on, and then hockey with Teddy. He popped a lozenge into his mouth and sucked. He opened his mouth and felt the sharp cold. But there was also a warmth in his stomach and neck. This would be a trick a father would show a child. Thanks so much.
Everyone, please give a round of applause to Ross McMeekin. KO knockout. I'm getting back on my feet from hearing those two stories. And yeah, as you kind of described them, the first one minor fall, major, and the second one major lift. And for our audience who's not familiar, Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah mentions those in the lyrics, and it's also musical court stuff. So look at that. Interesting stuff. And I want to go and revisit this first story you told, Ross. And you know, you were right. It definitely has a darker feel to it, and I want to kind of do a deeper dive into this. And what stood out for me was that you had this character kind of reflecting on his father and the highs and lows of fatherhood. And there was this tenderness of remembering, at least of this character, and then also perhaps maybe the hardship of forgetting. And I do think that those two elements definitely represent someone who is not just only growing up, but someone who has to grow up or must grow up because the situation is just so complicated. So, I mean, Ross, I'm very curious because I was just so struck by that, both stories, but especially that first one. I want to know from you, why is this story so important for you to share with others?
Well, I think the father-son relationships are often fraught and historically repeat themselves. And there's this sense of moving into a role unintentionally. You find yourself almost pushed into a situation and you become like that. And there's this almost gravity that kind of comes around. At least that's kind of how I see it as I've experienced it. And there's legacies that are wonderful and there's legacies that aren't. And how do those two not just like, it's not just one or the other, they're together in that, and they're kind of mixed up and threaded and thatched together like that. And so I wanted to show a story that had those. There's this sense of tenderness, but also this sense of violence. And there's this, and you know, how we treat the environment, how we treat each other, it becomes confused. So I think that's kind of why I wanted to share the confusion of that relationship.
The tears coming out right now. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to take a walk after this and do some reflecting on my own. So thank you so much, Ross, for sharing your work. It's just really powerful stuff. So everyone, please again, give another round of applause to Ross McMeekin. Appreciate it. All right, we're on out to our fourth and final reader. Just amazing work. I'm just really privileged to hear these amazing stories and poems. And so we're going to go to Juan Carlos Reyes, who has published a novella, A Summer's Lynching, from Quarterly West, and the fiction chapbook Elements of a Bystander from Arcadia Press. His stories, poems, and essays have appeared in Florida Review, Waccamaw Journal, and Hawaii Review, among others. He has been the recipient of the Gar LaSalle Artist Trust Storyteller Award, a PEN USA Emerging Voices Fellowship, and a Jack Straw Writers Fellowship. He received his MFA from the University of Alabama and has taught poetry and fiction with the Alabama Prison Arts Plus Education Project. He sits on the board of the Seattle City of Literature organization and serves as an assistant professor of creative writing at Seattle University, and he also serves as the chief editor at Big Fiction magazine. Everyone, please welcome Juan Carlos Reyes.
First of all, I am so humbled by all the work that's been shared today. It's just, it feels amazing that I get to not necessarily summarize everybody's contribution, but just applaud it and just sit here in awe of what everybody has done today. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this event. For me, it's absolutely wonderful sharing this intimate space of storytelling, especially in a moment like this where we get to explore what being a guide and what needing a guide means as we keep on growing up. Thank you, DA, for inviting me to participate, bringing this event together. Thank you, Stesha, for your work helping to make this happen through the Seattle Public Library. Thank you to Aaron, whose work in this town with youth, artists, and supporting equity in the literary community is a model to everybody. Thank you to Alex, whose work centering labor rights professionally and creatively encourages everyone to center sustainable development in the arts. And thank you to Ross, whose work challenges us to look at each other more precisely, more curiously, and with a generosity of spirit. And as I take the mic now, I'm excited to introduce the essay I'm going to read. It's titled First Encounters. I know on my part, I'm always trying to figure out what being a guide means for my children, for my family. I know I'm always trying to look for guides in my life, those people who get to teach me about discernment and how to make meanings of things. This essay is very much about my own first encounters with those prominent guides or would-be guides, with being one myself. It's about childhood and encountering fatherhood. It's about what it means to recognize an encounter in the first place. And it's about the people in those moments who help us focus on the present and help us understand what these small leaps in time mean. And so here is my essay. It's entitled First Encounters. Encounter. I get home and I unlock the door, exhausted by the commute from high school to home. The New Jersey Transit bus line from Jersey City to West New York navigates mostly long avenues of squat apartment buildings and old churches, not to mention storefronts with names in as many languages as there are letters in my full name. After I open the front door, I sigh in the apartment foyer and drop my backpack by the kitchen threshold. My mother, standing by the oven and over the cutting board, reminds me that the backpack belongs in my room, or at the very least, not by the door. I pick it back up and I head for the hallway. But before I could turn into it, a shadow at the living room window stops me cold. It's a stranger in my home. My mother always used to teach me to force my hellos, even when I was confused, even when I didn't want to. Because even a simple greeting is never about the other person. It's always a reflection of how confident you are in yourself. So she used to say. And so I managed just that. Hello. Our apartment is small, so 3 steps past the door and I'm in the dining room. 2 steps around the dining room table and I'm in the living room. A 5 o'clock May sunlight overlooks the old carpet. And I realize my mother's tone doesn't nag me to make sure I've actually put away my backpack. In fact, she gets to me and she sets her hand on one of the shoulder straps. She joins me at the table to tell me she'd like me to meet someone. A man I've never met walks a straight line to me, smiling broadly. He tucks his shirt into the waistband of his pants as he circles the glass coffee table, and he takes a breath. And then he extends his hand for a shake. I remember high school largely as a stale attempt to endure in all boys prep school, wearing collared shirts a little too billowy for my arms. The point is, I barely remember the formative details that should matter, like those afternoons pretending to be a garage band in someone's basement, or intimacies in undisclosed locations with my high school girlfriend. I rolled through the days until they became weeks and months, doing a lot, feeling a lot, remembering little. And then I shake this guy's hand. He clasps mine firmly as if to tell me that he's here, and that I'm here. He says something as a fire truck blares its sirens 8 stories below us, and so I ask him to repeat himself. The white between the hem of his buttons reveals a ribbed tank top beneath the pinstriped cotton shirt. The belt upholding his pants blends into the dark tones of his pleats. Even his black shoes look just like mine. And then here's my mother, resting her hand on my shoulder with a timing that seems to want to catch that precise moment I lose the question that I wanted to ask. Definition. An encounter nudges you into looking, into making sure your body is still what it's been, replacing motion with a hard stop that isn't just you hitting the brakes. It's your next thought crashing into the last one that hasn't even finished. It's your mind trying to catch up to your eyes. A mediator is the person that raises your chin, straightens your shoulders, and reminds you not to slouch. If necessary, they'll stop what they're doing to direct you. Sometimes they offer the encounter. Sometimes they just pray their way through it. Like you, they're also just trying to figure out what's real and what's a ghost. Encounter. The memory of my father starts in pictures. The picture of my first birthday, maybe second, as I stand on a table in a feathered cone hat, him hoisting me above the cake as I set to blow out the candles. The picture of us in a living room. I'm wearing toddler sailor pants, each of us smiling in different directions, and the cabinets sit between aged wallpaper. The picture of us in someone's front yard. I'm sucking a red, white, and blue popsicle, and the grass is dry. The winter after I turn 19, I visit him. I tell people I do this compelled, but for no reason I can define. Then or now. My millennium seems to end with an earnest attempt to challenge what makes me feel safe, and nothing spells that least than my fear of heights. I have a window seat on the way to Ecuador. I look outside it regularly. I also grip the armrests furiously as I look outside. The first time my father walks me into his bedroom to show me old pictures, the door doesn't creak. Unlike the stairs that nag our whole way up, the light turns on without a flicker, and there's no moisture in the air over his bed. It's the height of summer, and everything else with any access to the sun's heat, an airport rail or a cab seat or the windows of the corner store, is smothered in sweat. My father had gone back to live with his parents in his 40s, and when he pointed to where he slept, a mattress on the floor of his childhood room, he smiled. His lips didn't bend like an embarrassed boy's. They smirked, like a man resigned to having said all the things a man has to say when he doesn't know if he wants to say them at all. Along 3 walls, the 4th smothered by his clothes sitting inside of and on top of and around his dresser, he had stacked piles and piles of books. Not a bookshelf in sight. He slept surrounded by these books. They towered over his reclined body. Who knows what kinds of dreams they inspired or the kinds of nightmares they provoked? Just so many words. So many that had nurtured or prodded or satisfied or bothered him. So many that by his own admission had fed his insomnia for as many years as he'd been able to remember. Soon enough, my father's mother calls us into the dining room where she serves lunch on a plastic table runner. Guatita and cuáquer. Pronounced guatita and cuáquer. I don't know if I remember the names the way I should. For the longest time, I had to consult an encyclopedia just to correctly spell Guayaquil. The city that gave birth to me has always been a stranger. I am its son no more than I am the son of New York, Alabama, or Chile. My father's mother sits across the table from me, just looking, just leaning in, chin in hand, smiling and nodding like she can pretend to know my words before they slip out of me, like she can pick them up and know where to put them. She tells me I used to climb over my crib walls and wander until somebody caught up with me. Down the stairs, up and over the safety gate that separated from the hallway that led to the stairwell that led to the apartment my biological parents first shared so long ago. She tells me that her house, her squat 3-unit building, was my first home. She asks me if I can believe that I used to live there with her so closely. I smile. I don't know what to do with the attention. I nod. I think my lips bend like a boy who wants to change the subject, but doesn't know how. Definition. An encounter makes itself known. Even when you're not ready, an encounter points to itself and urges you to look at me. It drags on, even in the heat, as if by just extending time, it could have enough time to know what it wanted to be. As if by just extending time, the silence could be the meaning that satisfies the moment. A mediator sometimes doesn't even have to touch you. Sometimes a mediator just wants to sit there, watching both you and the body language you breathe. Even when no one is moving, the expressions that confront us run circles around the room. They ask us, are you paying attention? They ask us, what's it going to take for you to pay attention? Encounter. Years ago, on May 14th, my wife took our son to her chest and closed her eyes. Cheeks pressed to the top of his soft, wet head. Exhausted as she was, relieved that he had emerged from her before midnight. Her doctor stepped aside to let me by. Her doctor grabbed my forearm as I passed, squeezed it, shook it, her face hanging and tired, and her breathy, she did it, seemed to expand the room. Everything suddenly felt so far away. But then my wife reached for my wrist. She inhaled deeply, as if my son's hair had sprouted lavender between blinks. And then she pulled me in to meet her eyes up close. I'd been massaging my wife's feet for almost an hour. The butt of my palms had cramped. My knuckles had stiffened. I couldn't close my fists, and so my fingers felt the right kind of weak to just graze the top of my son's head without pressing, to massage his ears without squeezing, to trace his eyebrows without scratching. The doctor told us they wanted to weigh him, and so my wife whispered that I should be the one to carry him to the cart. She said, here. She said, reach for him. She said, he wants to hear from you. Encounters sometimes don't have to introduce themselves. Sometimes they sit tight, smiling, confident that we will eventually get to them. Sometimes a mediator compels an encounter, produces it, directs it, embodies it, and then hands it to us wrapped in the wild silence of that hello. A body from a body for a body. Sometimes an encounter is a flash, a definition made in the sweat of a moment, the heat of a touch, and it pushes you into a walk just holding the encounter. Every step, a new threshold. Every breath, a new room. I brought my son to the heat lamp and laid him on the scale. I felt the need to mind every step there. The cables from all the machines sprawled across the floor, the trays and equipment jutting in odd angles, the potential for an accident every few feet. On the scale, the overhead light blasted a new energy onto his face. An encounter with clarity. The wrinkles, the curls, the small hairs across his back. I grabbed his thumb. I held on to his finger as they balled around one of mine. And this is where accounting begins. The act of remembering first encounters. Making lists so that every encounter is a tally of first encounters. Before one of the attending nurses arrived, I leaned over him to whisper a soft shush into his ears. An all too human impression of the ocean that probably sounded like I was exhaling a throaty haze. I pressed my forehead into his, pressed my cheek into his, pressed my lip onto the side of his. I took a mental accounting of our bedroom at home, of his bassinet, of the small mattress there, of the rails there, of the list I was already making because every last thing in the hospital room seemed to be pointing to something else outside the room. Correlations become their own encounter, especially after the first encounter cements itself onto your hands. Thank you.
Everyone, please give Juan Carlos Reyes a round of applause, as well as to the family. I just love those moments. It just brought a smile to my face. And as you can see, the family resemblance is quite strong. I want to ask, you were correct that your essay was summarizing all the themes introduced by the other writers. And what I was really struck is that you talking about being a guide, understanding the responsibilities, the ups and downs, and so forth. And I'm actually kind of cautious to ask this question because your kids are there. And here's the question. So I'm curious what's going to happen when you, the guide, falls behind for whatever reason, for whatever future reason we don't know, and when your children become your guide. Will that moment be a sigh of relief, thank goodness I'm exhausted, or will it be a full-fledged crisis? I'm just very curious.
Oh, it won't be a crisis for sure. I think one of the things that we try, my daughter's sending a message to Alex Gallup Brown and his family right now. I welcome that. I really look forward to that. I think we practice that as much as we can, taking their leads emotionally where we can, taking as much as they would like to offer us with a sense of like we're still there to guide them, right? At some point they're going to guide us, and I'm looking forward to that day. I don't think for me it's a crisis. I think they lead me now in so many ways because they need to lead me into them, right? Into their minds, into their hearts, and into what they not want, but into what they need. You know, even if it's just like a presence in a moment, some silent presence together, or just a walk. Cuddle. So
I
yeah.
love that. That's wonderful. And just what a perfect way to end this series and this evening. And so everyone, again, please give Juan Carlos Reyes a round of applause, as well as to the fam. Thank you so much for that perfectly timed entrance, you two. So thank you so much. Well, thank you, readers, for sharing your work and also inviting us, the audience, into your vulnerability. I think each reader answered what it means to grow up or even have to grow up, as well as sharing their ups and downs of adulthood and fatherhood. So as we wrap up this evening, I'd like to share a quote from writer Lois McMaster Bujold, who says, "Growing up, I have discovered over time, is rather like housework, never finished." And so our fifth and final event of the series will be Thursday, July 15th at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, where we'll continue our exploration of growing up. in especially the third act of life called adulthood. And we'll have the City of Redmond poet laureate Raul Sanchez, Southern writer and poet Gabrielle Bates, and nonfiction writer and Lambda Literary Award winner Matilda Bernstein Sycamore. So again, that date is going to be Thursday, July 15th at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And with all that said, I'll hand it back to Stesha for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. That was such a powerful evening, and I just loved the cameos by the family. That's actually the first time that that's happened where the kids have joined, and it just really, I think, is perfect and poignant with the subject matter. So I'm so happy to see all of the families participate. Thank you all too. Just the reading was just a delight. So that was great. For folks watching, if you're interested in checking out these writers' work, Alex's book is available at Open Books, our partner on the program. And actually, all of the writers' books are also available at Elliott Bay Book Company. Some of the folks that write non-poetry, you might need to go to Elliott Bay to find. But just check out Open Books, check out Elliott Bay, and look out for more work from these wonderful writers. As I mentioned earlier, we're interested in hearing from you, and I'm going to post a link to a little survey, program survey. I'm actually doing it right now. That's what we're doing. So if you want to take a minute after the event to let us know what you think about programming at the library, that would be super helpful. I read all of the comments, and it helps drive and shape the programming in the coming years. So if you have a minute, please take a minute and let us know what you think. And finally, we're just so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Huge thank you to DA for doing such an amazing job with this series. This is a new program for us, working with guest curators, and he's just knocking it out of the park. Every event has just been so amazing. And actually, you can go back and watch a lot of the other programs on the SPL YouTube if you're interested. So just go to YouTube and look up the Seattle Public Library, and we've got them archived on the site. We're very grateful to our program partners, Open Books, and thanks to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. We couldn't do it without them. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.